Behind every breakthrough in education is a conversation that sparked it. Thank you for joining us and welcome to the Education Insider, the podcast that gives you inside access to the brightest thinkers, innovators, and changemakers in education today. Hosted by Jacob Hanson and powered by PRP Group, a Hawk media company. We're cutting through the noise to bring you straightforward, insightful discussions that move education forward. No fluff, no jargon, just real, actionable insights from the people making a difference today and those shaping the future of education. Buckle up, because the Education Insider starts now.
Well, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for another awesome episode of the Education Insider. As always, I have a super awesome show for you today. Something that's been popping up in my world a lot lately, a lot more than maybe ever in my career in education. And so I'm here to chat with a friend of mine here, expert in branding, managing director at Super Top Secret, Joey Yorba. He and I have gotten to know each other. Both of our agencies were acquired by Hawk Media last summer, and so we've gotten to know each other through that. But it's just been crazy how much branding has been coming up. I mean, more than, like I just said, you guys are going to get tired of hearing this, but more than I've ever seen in my career in PR. And so I want to hand the mic over to Joey, give him a chance to kind of give some background on his career in branding, maybe how he ended up in branding, and just give us your take on, like, what does branding, brand identity, like, really mean? Why is it so important?
Yeah, I mean, that's a heck of a setup. I could probably talk for a couple hours on that. I think I've always been a brand guy. I worked for a long time on the brand side. So I've worked for a handful of larger brands, primarily in the action sports industry. And there was always just this thing about, kind of this feeling and connection that you have to brands that you've followed your entire life. And so when I had the opportunity about 10 years ago to work on the agency side as well in branding, it just sort of made sense. Our connections to brands as consumers, whether you're, an actual end consumer of a CPG product, or you're a student, or you're a business who's, purchasing services from another business, it all boils down to the story and the feeling that you're going to be a part of when you interact with those brands. And it's something that we've really focused in on at Super Top Secret. And for my money, it's the most powerful part of the consumer journey is what is that brand touch point, and how does it make you feel as a consumer?
Well, I love it, and that whole idea of how does it make you feel? What do people think? What do they walk away with? I think is huge, and right now it's louder. I'd say louder than ever, and more than likely driving folks to look at exploring, updating their messaging or their branding, those kinds of things. And so, um, can you maybe dive in, Joey, and just talk about, like, what does branding really mean to you? I mean, you just said for the money, it's the most important part of the journey. What does that part of the journey look like? I deal with folks thinking PR is just a press release, and what do you do with that? I'm assuming folks come to you and say, I need a new logo, I need new branding, I need a new logo.
Yeah, I mean, it's branding to me is a lot of things, but I mean, you hit it on the head. It's so much more than a logo. We often say that consumers, they don't buy products anymore, right? They don't just select something because it's in front of them. They select something because of the story that they can be a part of, right? And so by by creating stories for our brands that we work with and our clients, it's what's really starts to create that emotional touch point. And you're right, like a logo is part of it, but there's so many other pieces that go into building a brand and making sure that all those pieces exist, all the guidelines and platform exists so that we can really make sure that we know what it looks like, what does it feel like, what does it sound like? Because to your point, if we're just talking about a press release and that's the only component of PR, there's a whole lot of areas of the world that are getting left untouched. And I think the same thing applies with people thinking branding is just a logo. If you just have this one mark, this one corporate rectangular logo, and that's the only thing that you have for your brand, whether you're a school district or a supplement brand or a t-shirt company, you're going to have so many other places that you're just going to struggle to make that one logo work, right? So by looking at all of the other pieces of branding from color, typography, secondary assets, icons, that's what really builds out a brand to us. But even before that, it's all the pieces that go into messaging and really making sure that the tone and the voice is set for that brand, and you know who you are as a brand, what you stand for, and how to communicate that and reach those audiences that you're trying to communicate with.
As a doing, primarily PR PR and marketing for most of my career, I'm stepping in once the work you're talking about is done, or like air quotes for those that are just listening, done. And that oftentimes we're not even given enough assets to satisfy media that may land on a client's website. And so, right now, I think, again, is a good case to be made to be looking at your messaging, your visuals, all of that kind of stuff. What do you say maybe to the folks who haven't invested in this, or maybe are looking at that? Well, we've got our logo, we're good to go. What do you say to some of those folks that might just say, "Oh, we don't need all that crap. Like we just put the logo on and we go." What do you say to them?
Well, I cry inside a little bit, but then I gather my thoughts, and then no, we usually go down the road of just helping our clients understand that consumers have a wealth of options that we didn't necessarily have. I mean, when I was growing up, or in the past, right? Um, and so you have to find ways to stand out. And that truly comes from the way that you communicate your values and your vision and the way that you put those things out into the world. So I think, again, whether no matter what the product is, there's just too many options where you can't just be another product on there and assume that people are going to understand your unique value proposition, right? You have to communicate it from the rooftops. I mean, now going very clearly into your world, right? You have to get that message out to people. The old Field of Dreams adage does not work for brands. It just doesn't. You have to be speaking louder than everybody else, but you also have to be saying things that are relevant and true. And the consumer nowadays is so much smarter than they used to be. There's so much power and technology at their fingertips. You have to figure out how to truly resonate with them, um, while also still selling the benefits of what you're offering.
So walk me through a little bit. I know I've heard you use like the brand first mindset. Walk me through what that looks like a little bit. What does it mean to actually be brand first?
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts with brand messaging and really understanding the foundation in tone of voice and and what you stand for as a brand, right? So leading with the feeling and the emotion, like we talked about a second ago, that you're trying to convey before you get to the physical or intangible product that you're selling. It's again selling the emotion and that kind of experience that you're hoping your consumer to get before you start talking about the toothbrush or the higher education like path that you could be on, or whatever the thing is. It's really focusing on, here's how we're trying to better your experience, and now we're going to show you the specific ways that that will happen. So I think it's just coming out of the gate, again, being really clear and intentional in what you're trying to offer, but also sticking to the script at the end of the day, right? Like, once you've created those guidelines, I mean, they're there for a reason. And creating that consistency is super, super helpful as well.
Well, you've mentioned consistency a few times. We were literally in a conversation earlier today that we were talking to someone that there was just no, that was the only reason they were there. What brought them to the table is just the lack of consistency across the organization and everyone trying their best but going rogue in their own way.
Yeah, I mean, I love me a good anecdote or a metaphor. I still don't know the difference between the two, but I do love them. Um, but if you look at the way like spilt water will run, right? Like, if you drop a glass of water, it'll kind of just go to the path of least resistance. And I think stewards of your brand, or therefore employees, will go to the path of least resistance if they're not given the proper guidelines to move forward in the way that you want them, right? So with the spilt glass, like, if it falls into a rut or a crack in the floor, it's going to follow that crack. We're not necessarily trying to build cracks of brand guidelines, but where maybe the metaphor break down a little bit, what we're trying to do is create these guidelines so that employees whether they're a teacher or a superintendent or they're a social media coordinator, right? We give them those guidelines so that they're operating with the same goal in mind as the folks who built or worked with us to build those guidelines from. And creating that consistency does a lot of things. It helps the consumer understand and be able to count on what you're going to say and what your stance is going to be. You don't want to be extremely fun and jovial and kind of silly one day and then be overly dramatic and straightforward and clinical the next day. It just creates this kind of whiplash effect that will really make it hard for your consumers to attach themselves to your brand. So creating that consistency and flow is what again makes you um, an accountable brand to your consumer.
And I mean, you're talking about some things that could end up getting, difficult to get to answers. Can you maybe throw out a few tips of how should folks start these conversations, or how do they know that maybe a better look at their brand or their messaging is it's the right time to do that? Um,
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a lot of times these things that we end up helping extract from our clients' brains are things that they've been circling around, right? So back to the conversation you mentioned that we had previously today, most of the problems that they were having were brand structure problems, right? And so most of our clients, when they come to us, they've already realized that there's this thing that's off or this thing that they're struggling with. So I would say while the outcome and creating the outcome is difficult, most of the time the signs are already there. Um, and I think you really need to like lean into, okay, well, I'm having these problems, and these problems are inconsistent messaging, uh, folks going rogue when it comes to visual uh, pieces of collateral that they're creating. I mean, those are very, to me at least, very clear indications that there's a guidelines problem, there's a rule book problem. So I think if you're having issues with inconsistency with your brand and your messaging, then you're ready to go, right? It's time to get into a brand guideline process and start to create that rule book.
well, and just getting that rule book started is even difficult. I mean, you can probably find some good examples online, things like that. What are some of the areas that you look at as far as what goes into that rule book, Joey? I mean, it's just font, colors?
I think that's what most of our clients would hope that it was
So I'm,
just,
so
right?
I'm
And
trying to
there's a
say,
lot
yeah,
of
yeah,
typing. Yeah.
trying to say, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, I love it. Well, we always start our process in some sort of strategic deep dive. We've got a couple tiers to our process, but at the end of the day, the thing that we're starting with is a massive deep dive and discovery into what exists, what's been successful, what hasn't been successful. But then the first deliverables are focused in brand messaging. I've said that a few times, but with one key piece that we use called a brand ideal. The brand ideal is that emotional driver, right? It's that feeling that you want your consumers to feel. And there's a ton of examples out there, Home Depot and Nike, Volvo. Volvo's a good example just for brevity, but Volvo sold this idea for decades that they were the leader in safety. And if you think of Volvo, you think of safety, right? That's what you think of. Nowadays, in the last, I'd say, 8 to 10 years, they're actually not the leader in safety, but you still will think that they are the leader in safety because they put so much energy into that as their brand ideal. So we really love to focus on that as our first piece of messaging. Um, and it really works no matter what industry or vertical that you're in. And once we've established that, then everything else that we look at in terms of messaging, intro statements, social copy examples, if it doesn't ladder up to that brand ideal, then it's off brand, right? Then we know that we need to continue pushing to find what that thing is that's going to feel like it ladders up to that brand ideal. Yeah, and so there's a few other devices that we use, this, not that statements are also super, super helpful because they help define or draw that line between things that we want to associate with as a brand and things that we want to stay away from. Arrogance and confidence is maybe the best like quick illustration, right? Most people want to convey confidence, but nobody really wants to tip over and be arrogant. Maybe a couple people, but we want to draw that line, right? Um, and then once that messaging foundation is established, then we move into visuals. And to your point, it's just fonts and colors, right? But we start with the main mark. We make sure that that main mark is strong and feels that like it conveys that brand ideal as well. We look for iconography within that main mark. We look for ways that we can pull out a secondary asset that doesn't compete against the main mark, but it supports it. And you can think of all your favorite brands. They don't just have one logo. They definitely have a word mark or a logo that they use more often than not, but there's other pieces around it that really start to support the main mark while giving a lot of other options. And then once we've done that, then we'll look at color. We'll look at primary colors, secondary color. We'll look at typography hierarchy, right? Here's your headline font, here's your body copy, all of those things that flow from there. And then my favorite part of the visual branding process is something we call tertiary assets, which is where the messaging pieces, taglines, different things that we've already pulled out in messaging, as well as the visual brand and colors kind of come together. And those things very quickly become hats or t-shirts, stickers, social posts. And at the end of the day, when you step back and you look at all those things that I just mentioned, you can see a very clear brand, not just a logo. You can see a brand and you can start to see all the places that it could go and the feelings that it's going to start to evoke when it's put out into the world.
I love it. I love it. Well, I know that we're coming up on time, so I'm gonna try and wrap things up. But as far as folks, here in education, just given the landscape out there, and with policy and everything changing almost by the day, we covered in a previous episode, talked about localization and trying to scale localization. There's a lot of different things that are changing right now. One of the things that's pretty sure that's going to change is more of the localization of education, specifically in K-12. Bringing the more of that money and the decision making power to the states and ultimately down to the district. Now, you could argue that district decision making it's always been local, or education decision making has always been local. However, how do you work or advise with on brands that maybe need to be a little bit more flexible with how they appear on more of that local level and still maintain, a very close similarity or like a hologram or whatever it is of what that branding is? I don't know if I'm portraying this right, but how can you, localize it without and then scale?
Yeah, I mean, part of that messaging journey is really establishing high level thoughts and feelings about your brand. And so if we're talking about a school district, for instance, we would start at the district level, right? Like you do with most things. You'd start at that level to understand what the core values are and the principles of the district. Then when we look at schools within that district, it's kind of like looking at a house of brands, right? We're looking at a parent brand, and then we're looking at brands underneath them that will share the same high level philosophies but need to differentiate themselves for their audience because a high school is going to have a different audience than a K through 6 program. And we really need to pivot that. It doesn't mean it's a completely different tone of voice and it's completely off the wall compared one to the next, but we're pivoting that message. And so we start high level and then we start to look at the differences in the community. How does the demographic shift for this community versus that? What are the potential differences in importance when it comes to a high school student's family or parents versus some of the lower elementary schools? Sorry. Um, and truly just make sure that we're creating messaging that resonates with those differences. If you're trying to send the same message to a multitude of audiences, it's going to not resonate with some of them. right? And so you really need to make sure that you're paying attention again to your consumer. Consumers don't have to just be someone who's going to walk into a mall and buy something. Consumers can be parents, they can be local leaders, they can be all sorts of different things. And it's all about creating and having conversations with people where they are and hitting on the things that are the most important to them. So, different communities are just different audiences, and you got to make sure that you're taking that messaging, that high level messaging, and then making sure there's adjustments made for those different audiences. I think I answered
Awesome.
your question, but who
You
knows?
you did. Yeah, I appreciate it. I appreciate it, Joey. Well, and I'm sure we're going to hear from some folks with questions, but I really appreciate you taking time to share some of your expertise here. Anything else that you want to leave folks with before we go?
No, I had fun. I could talk about this stuff all day long. I love it. It's important, and it's this kind of, I don't know, not always paid attention to thing that we deal with every single day as people. So, no, this is fun. Thank you. Appreciate it.
A- Absolutely. And for folks out there that want to hear me wow a little bit more, I mean, PR is the same way. Folks look at it as a nice to have until they need it, and then they realize, how valuable it is. So, definitely have you back at another show, Joey. It was great. Everybody, thanks for sticking with us. We'll have Joey's contact info, website, LinkedIn, everything like that in the show notes. Really appreciate you joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode.
That's all the awesome we have for you today. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join us. Please don't keep this episode a secret. The best insights, the biggest ideas, and the most important conversations, they're meant to be shared. So please, pass this episode along, leave a review, and hit subscribe so you never miss a chance to be part of the conversations shaping the future of education. Join the conversation and share your questions and episode ideas with us at jhanson@hawkmedia.com. We'll see you next time on the Education Insider.